Chapter 41. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What did he just say? Xenia anxiously mused, her body remaining unmoving as she kept still. She didn't dare turn her head to look at him, or else, their faces would collide, and she didn't want that at all. You are mine, the words kept replaying themselves in her head. It wasn't the first time the king had reiterated that he owned her life. However, the way he said those words a while ago felt different. It was as if he wanted her in a different way, and not just simply as his own person, as his subject. Xenia frowned as she quickly shook off those unnecessary thoughts inside her head. She was probably thinking too much on it, only to then panic as she finally realized how she had kept as still as a statue. It was so unlike her to feel as conflicted like this, having no idea what to do as she decided on what to do next. Gathering her senses, she instantly stepped backwards, afraid that the king would discover the loud thumping of her heart. She didn't want him to see how affected she was by his words. In a way, she should be annoyed and furious, but she wasn't. Instead, she found herself more nervous than anything, practically cowering, to be exact. "This lad is with me," the king declared, passing by her with his stoic face like nothing was happening. By the sidelines, Xenia heaved out a sigh of relief when the king diverted his attention away from her. Finally, she could let herself breathe a bit normally and compose herself. She kept quiet and meek as she turned around and followed him into the castle. She needed badly to get inside, and at this rate, the king was currently her only way into the castle unscathed. King Darius, the Valkyries soldiers bowed in respect to Darius, and Xenia just wanted to hit them all for not being given the same respect. "Don't they know that I'll be their queen soon?" Xenia inwardly scoffed, looking at the soldiers bowing their heads in front of her. These dimwits. But then again, she was technically still in her disguise. Still, her worry remained as it kept creeping inside her nerves. She could only hope that what was happening now was nothing but an extra precautionary measure, one that was needed because of the approaching enemy forces. King Darius and King Nikolai must have been good friends, Xenia thought. Just from that sight alone, Xenia could already tell that Darius indeed had a good relationship with the Vampire King. Without a single word uttered, the guards promptly let them enter. Walking through the gate, Xenia let out a sigh of relief as soon as they were firmly within the castle walls. She was finally back, and it was only a matter of time before she could manage to get out of this king's grasp. Looking around, she frowned as she noticed that not one of their people inside the castle was roaming around. Even servants. Was the castle evacuated? What happened? King Darius asked Gideon. Why are there Valkyries soldiers surrounding the castle walls? Xenia couldn't help but nod as she listened. That was precisely what she wanted to know as well. As such, she kept an ear out as she waited for Gideon's report. Nikolai found out that his bride .to.be, the elder princess, is missing, Gideon began. They found out. Xenia held in her breath. King Stefan had failed to honor the agreement between the two kingdoms, and everything else went on from there. It's honestly a chaotic situation, Your Majesty. She halted mid-step, her face was paler than before as she inwardly gasped. This can't be, her eyes flitted towards her surroundings once more. With the Valkyries soldiers surrounding the entire castle, Xenia knew that it could only mean one thing. His father failed to talk things out with the Vampire King, and the kingdom was plunged into conflict. She felt sick to her stomach. Unfortunately, Prince Ezekiel had left to secure the borders with Ebodia's armies, leaving the castle with only a few mages and soldiers, Gideon continued. The moment I informed them about Helion's army approaching, they were already mobilizing to defend their borders. It was then that King Nikolai arrived for the wedding, only for him to find out that the eldest princess is missing. Gideon sighed. King Stefan then tried offering the hand of his second daughter in return, but King Nikolai simply ordered his men to surround the castle. He then grounded the king and queen along with the second princess inside the meeting hall, forcing them into a serious talk with his Valkyries council that he arrived with. Nikolai would have a hard time dealing with his council, Darius pondered. Those elders will definitely seize this opportunity to siege Ebodia. Though, Nikolai will surely handle this matters carefully. What do I do? This is all my fault, Xenia murmured, her eyes meeting with the king's back as tears ran down her cheeks. She was too late. Zen, you stay here with Gideon and Bardas while I find out more about the situation, the king spoke. I will go to Nikolai directly. Xenia didn't respond. Instead, she let the two men lead her on as she went through the motions. After a while, however, both men stopped and looked at her, a frown both on their foreheads as they watched her. I can't have you roaming around alone, Zen. I will deal with you later. For now, behave and stay with Gideon and Bardas, the king uttered with his stoic expression. He then looked at Gideon and said, make sure that you and Bardas won't let Zen out of your sight. You two will face the consequences if you lose Zen. If Zen tries to escape, I don't care what you both have to do. Make sure you will not let that happen without a single scratch on Zen. The two saluted despite the confused reactions on their faces. The king's eyes then darted to her as he said, Zen's been poisoned by the Tatar berry. Zen's inner force is still suppressed. Xenia blinked at what she heard. No wonder she felt as if something was missing from her body. Assuming that was the case, if she ever fought with those vampire soldiers, she could die without even seeing her family one last time. Her mind in turmoil, Xenia met the king's stare. Could she really trust this man with her identity? Seeing the king approach her, Xenia suddenly felt a chill wash over her. The king's silhouette then became blurry as her eyes shut themselves from the world. Everything went blank. Chapter 42. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Quickly moving behind, Darius immediately caught Zen's falling body in his arms. Zen's face was troubled, worry staining those usually beautiful features. Why are you so stubborn? Darius murmured while he lovingly gazed at the person in his arms. He was too exhausted last night that he dozed off quickly the moment he had his back on the comfortable bed. He almost went crazy when he woke up and found out that Zen was already gone. Worried as hell for Zen's safety in traveling alone, he instantly shifted to his wolf-man form to look for Zen. Thank the heavens that he arrived just in time. Darius turned to Gideon, I need a room. I will see to Zen first before anything else. But your majesty, Gideon quickly spoke up. King Nikolai and the council are waiting for you. Not until I set Zen down on a comfortable bed. Darius growled. Doing his best to play the concerned diplomat, Gideon approached his king and offered, I can carry Zen for you. No, Darius barked aloud, ignoring all reason as he promptly walked ahead towards the castle hallways. Spotting a Valkyries soldier, he then told him to call for an Ebodian servant that could assist him with locating an appropriate chamber for Zen. Soon, a servant came, and Darius gave the woman a scrutinizing look as she slightly bowed her head. The king almost barked out, lead me to one of your guest chambers. Yes, your majesty, the servant commented as she slightly tilted her head, only for her face to contort as a horrified look etched itself onto her face. What's wrong? Darius asked with a frown, noticing how the servant's gaze locked itself onto Zen. The servant stammered, I'm probably just mistaken, but he looks like. Dolly, a woman's voice suddenly interrupted, grabbing both of their attention as they turned their head to look at the newcomer. Looking on, Darius squinted at the woman wearing a regal outfit rapidly approaching them. With a crown sitting prettily on her head, he instantly recognized the figure as the respectable queen of the kingdom of Ebodia. Your Highness, King Darius, I was informed of your arrival, and my husband, King Stefan, asked me to leave the meeting hall in order to escort you to the... Queen Dana interrupted herself, her eyes lingering on Zen's unmoving figure in his arms. Taking note of the queen's sudden pause, Darius gave her a scrutinizing look. Somehow, He saw a hint of surprise flash through her face before it quickly disappeared. The queen was now expressionless as she promptly continued, I see that you have an unconscious companion. Is he ill? Would you like me to get a healer to check on him? Yes, please, Darius politely replied, and would you kindly show me to a room where I can have Zen rest and be guarded by my men before I see Nikolai and King Stefan? Please follow me, Queen Dana said with a timid smile as she walked ahead of Darius. As they walked through the halls, Darius couldn't help but speak up. I've heard about the situation from my men, and you must trust Nikolai on this. I know I'm an outsider, but I know him enough. He's with the council and the other royals, so it was inevitable for him to do what he must to pacify them, he explained. He will surely handle everything in a calm and careful manner, and he will be considerate to Abodia's plight. Darius didn't know why he said those exact words, but Queen Dana somehow reminded him of his own mother. He was pretty sure that the queen was worried, and he wanted to give the woman some comfort, knowing how his friend Nikolai's mind works. Surely, the Vampire King wouldn't abandon Abodia and let it be doomed just because of a runaway bride. That's thoughtful and considerate of you, Your Highness, Queen Dana smiled. However, I am confident that my daughter will come back for us. She can be reckless at times, but she will not let anything happen to her family. She will return and fix everything for sure. Hearing her words, the king was a bit surprised at how confident the queen sounded. But either way, he was glad to hear it. At least he wouldn't need to meddle in this affair after all. In the end, he would just finish his business talking with King Stefan and be on his merry way. His fellow king's personal request for his presence was the only reason he was in Abodia in the first place anyway. Showing his respect to his fellow monarch, Darius quietly followed the queen until they found themselves entering a spacious bedchamber. Walking forward, he gently laid Zen down on the bed. You seem to be a bit attached with this lad, Your Highness, the queen commented, her soft gaze lingering on Zen's unmoving body. I guess you could say that, Darius commented, an unknowing smile spreading across his face. I see, the queen nodded. No matter. You can safely leave the lad under my care and... But before she could finish her words, Gideon and Bardas had suddenly entered the bedchamber. She kept her tongue as she watched on. Apologies, Queen Dana, but these are the men who will guard Zen for the time being, Darius explained. Zen has the tendency to run away. Looking at the two imposing men standing guard, Queen Dana could only nod as her eyes fixated themselves on the unconscious lad. I see. I guess he loves running away then, she closed her eyes. Very well. Come now, and I will escort you to the meeting hall where everyone is gathered. Giving her a nod, Darius followed suit, giving Gideon and Bardas a knowing look as he telepathically relayed, make sure you won't lose Zen, or you too will have to face my wrath. His two knights could only gulp, bravely nodding at the same time as they stood guard. Walking back out to the hallway, the two monarchs fell into lockstep as the queen asked. How did he fall ill, Your Highness? Zen ate a poisonous berry, the Tatar berry, by accident while we were on the run through the forest, the king told his story. I already gave Zen a few drops of my blood to fight off the poison, but Zen's body is still adjusting to the treatment. Darius let off a small breath as he continued. I will appreciate it if you will send for a healer with magical power to tend to Zen's injury. I will need Zen to be in good condition as soon as I am done talking with his highnesses. I see, Queen Dana let off a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Your Majesty. We will have the best healers in the kingdom to attend to him. After a few moments of walking, the queen finally stopped in front of a door guarded by the soldiers of Valkres. Moving forward, the soldiers bowed to the two of them, opening the door as they ushered them inside. Darius thanked the queen for her time before walking further into the meeting hall. There, he shook his head upon seeing the commotion currently taking place as soon as he entered. Already, Darius could see a few familiar faces coming from Valkres. His eyes then darted towards the woman sitting beside King Stefan. He could only assume that she was the second daughter, but her face was currently covered by a veil obscuring her from vision. Despite his annoyance at the accessory, he still understood how it was a part of the customs of Ebodia for the wife to be to cover their faces on their wedding day. Quietly observing, Darius noted that Nikolai was quiet, his non-answer to King Stefan's offer still being the most pressing topic in the room. This is unacceptable. How could you expect us to settle with the second daughter when you promised us your eldest? One of the Valkyries' elders pointed out. Isn't she the cursed princess? Are you belittling our kingdom? Darius shook his head upon seeing Nikolai's unbothered expression. His fellow king turned to him as he scoffed, I see that you're here to witness this mess, my dear friend. Darius chuckled, not bothering with the current situation brewing around him as he said, I guess nobody would want to marry a blood-sucking bat, huh? And as if any human would want to marry an ugly barking dog, Nikolai jokingly scoffed as he stood in his chair. Approaching his friend, the two kings shared a hug. It's good to see, my friend. Chapter 43 You are listening at novelfull.audio. After making sure that King Darius was well situated on his own inside the meeting hall, Queen Dana promptly left him to his own. Stepping out, she finally breathed out a sigh of relief at her job well done. Now, however, she had a different priority. Heading straight to Jaira's chamber, she kept her composure as she went through the previous events in her head. She almost had a heart attack seeing her disguised daughter being carried around by the werewolf king. She was on the verge of just breaking down and hugging her daughter, but she managed to keep herself in check. Like everyone in their kingdom, she was well groomed enough to calm herself in emergency situations such as this. It was only a good thing that the werewolf king didn't notice anything suspicious. Reaching Jaira's chamber, she promptly knocked on the door. The young healer answered the door with a curious look. Queen Dana, wah. With me. Now the queen quickly cut her off. Xenia's back, and you must prepare a potion to neutralize a tatar berry so that she can get back on her feet. She then continued, also, prepare a spell that can knock out the two werewolves guarding her room. Something that can distort their memories, preferably. What memories should I substitute then? Make it so that they think Xenia knocked them out to escape, Queen Dana promptly replied. She's currently disguised as a man, so I'll grab her clothes while you can go directly to the duplex guest room in the east wing where she's currently held. Act natural around those werewolves. Be careful, move quickly. Taking her orders into memory, Jaira nodded and instantly grabbed the things that she'd need for her task. Meanwhile, the queen had left her room to get the princess's clothes. Why am I not surprised about this? Jaira scoffed with a pout, her arms full with her catalysts as she rashly walked out of her room. You absolute fool, looking around, the young healer took in the emptiness of the hallway. No one in the castle dared to come out of their room as soon as they received an order from their king to stay inside their chambers. All the while, the Ebodia royal family kept themselves grounded inside the meeting hall with the vampire king with his council and royal family. The missing princess was the cause of all this mess, and tempers were running high as they tried to come to a compromise. Meanwhile, Jaira was aware of why the princess ran away. After all, she was one of the few who helped the princess out of her own free will. She didn't think that her friend would come back this early, but at least she returned despite the mess she created. Truly, you're really too stubborn for your own good. With one last whisper of complaint, Jaira almost found herself running to the chamber where Xenia was supposedly being held. Knocking on the door, she quickly entered the room as soon as the door opened. I am Jaira, the healer. Mage for the royal family, Jaira announced her arrival, gulping at the two muscular men in front of her. The queen has instructed me to look after the. Her words slowly trailed off when one of the men finally showed her to the bed. Keeping her composure intact, she kept herself calm while looking at her princess's unconscious body. She might look like she wasn't doing anything at the moment, but unknown to the two werewolves, she had already started casting her spell from the moment she entered the room. Make it quick, the man with a scar on his face commented. Jaira had an awkward smile on her face as she nodded. Somehow, she felt intimidated and weirded out at how the man with the scar never left his scrutinizing gaze towards her. My apologies for Bartas's behavior, the other man chuckled. He rarely sees a beauty, so.ugh. Jaira winced at the sudden punch coming from the scarred man. She didn't think that she'd see violence that early in the day. Well, that hurt, the other man shook his head, flashing her an awkward smile. I'm Gideon, by the way. And the gruff guy here is Bartas. Please don't mind us as continue with your work. Very well, Jaira nodded. Leave me to my work. Quickly putting her attention back to her princess, she quietly uttered a spell to repair the princess's inner force. What's that smell? Bartas questioned, making Jaira gulp. It's the scented catalyst I'm using for your friend here to open his eyes, she quickly explained. She needs a booster to help her fight off the poison. Stilling her breath, Jaira was honestly finding it hard to breathe due to the penetrating gaze that she could feel boring into the back of her head. How did they expect her to focus if one of them kept glaring at her like that? Heard that, Bartas. Stop distracting the healer, will you? Jaira heard Gideon scolding his companion. It's not like the people inside this castle will do something funny when they already have enough of the mess that they're facing right now. Can you put your guard down for once? With that, Jaira's lips curled up, feeling a bit guilty since she was already doing something offensive. Waiting for some time for her spell to complete, she silently chanted the final words, fully empowering them to take down the two werewolves behind her. When the princess stirred and was about to open her eyes, Jaira turned to look at the two men behind her with a smile. She's well now, but I'm afraid you two will have to sleep, she murmured with an awkward smile. She really didn't have to say anything, but for some reason, it somehow felt appropriate to do so. I apologize in advance. What the hell? Before Bartas could even finish his words, he and Gideon had already lost consciousness. Their body fell to the floor, completely numb to the rest of the world. After making sure that her spell worked, Jaira then turned her back and smiled at the stirring princess. Welcome back, Your Highness. Chapter 44. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xenia had to blink several times as she stared at the young healer before her. Her eyes then darted to the floor, the bodies of Bartas and Gideon gracing her senses. What happened? Xenia gasped. She was feeling better now, but why was Jaira currently with her? There's no time to waste, Your Highness, Jaira urged her. Don't worry, they'll wake up in about 30 minutes. The explanation can come later. For now, the queen is on her way to get you a change of clothes. Ha! Mother. Xenia confusingly hummed. I thought she's grounded. Yes. They were inside the meeting hall earlier, but it seems that they instructed Queen Dana to go out earlier, Jaira replied. It was there that she probably saw you. I don't know the exact details. Xenia was about to ask for more details when the door swung open. She could only blink in wonder as her mother entered the room with a few servants in tow. You. Go to the adjacent room and get ready this instant, her mother sternly said, rushing towards her and practically pulling her into the secret door connecting to the other guest room. There's no time to waste. Xenia didn't know what was happening as she let herself get dragged by her mother. The servants entered with them together with Jaira, and she could only look on as her mother calmly gave out orders. She should be ready in less than 10 minutes, the queen said. That's all the time we'll get. Mother. Xenia murmured, her eyes welling up from the overwhelming emotions. Her mother turned to her with a faint smile and said, Let's talk later, dear. I'm just happy that you're back. She then continued, we can still rectify the situation. All you need to do is to show yourself at the meeting hall and deliver a good alibi on where you've been. Your father didn't say that you ran away. Instead, he told everyone that you were missing. What? The Valkyries Council then assumed that you simply ran away from the marriage. Thus, they forced King Nikolai to take proper action. her mother kept on speaking, seemingly ignoring her confusion. But the situation has changed. We can still fix this once you show yourself. Xenia was still in awe when one of the servants took off her clothes. She didn't even feel anything as she was being dressed like a doll. Instead, she simply listened to her mother as she thought up a good alibi that she could say before the Valkyries royals, the council, and their king. However. But what about the werewolf king? Xenia murmured. You're a lad to him, Xenia. A lad who simply ran away, the queen promptly pointed out. Jaira already took care of the two werewolves guarding you, and they wouldn't have any recollection of her entering the room. Instead, they'll remember you knocking them out in order to escape. She gave her a small smile. I'll take care of the rest, so just focus on your alibi. The werewolf king might not buy it, but he surely wouldn't make any drastic moves to compromise the situation. As her mother continued on, Xenia couldn't help but nod as she thought to herself. I guess in the end, I still can't run away from this fate of mine. I'll still be marrying the vampire king. It didn't even take them 10 minutes to finish preparing her. Before she knew it, she was once again the prim and proper princess. Are you ready? Jaira will accompany you to attest to your alibi, the queen muttered out, her hands already busy putting a veil over her head. It's a good thing that we have a Tatar berry in your sister's private garden. Xenia let out a small gasp as she heard her mother's words. She almost forgot that Mani loved studying potions and poisons, and her sister even had a private garden where she would personally grow wild plants and herbs that could either cure or kill people depending on their usage. Just in case needed, her mother whispered to herself before casting a magic spell for Xenia to see a brief view of Mani's garden. That is the location of the Tatar berries. Keep that in mind for later. Xenia nodded in understanding. The garden was situated in the forbidden wing of the castle, and no one was allowed to enter the place except for Mani or the members of the royal family. No one would look for her there knowing how she, the eldest princess, didn't even bother wanting to come down there. She couldn't even remember the last time that she set foot in the garden. It was simply unfortunate. Mani and her mother had the same hobbies: magic, spells, potions and poisons. They are practically the very opposite of her own interests. Ready? Her mother asked. I am, Xenia coolly responded, seeing her mother nodding in approval as she then turned to Jaira. The princess let out a sigh. Let's go. With that, Xenia promptly walked out of the room, Jaira slightly trailing behind her as they went to go to the meeting hall. I'm a bit nervous, Jaira opened up as they walked into the hallway. Don't worry. Mother thought up of a good alibi, and it's convincing enough as it is, Xenia reassured her friend. Although, I doubt that Darius, You addressed the werewolf king by his name. Jaria noted. A hint of teasing in her tone as she asked, I guess you two already bonded a great deal together. No, Xenia quickly denied. It's just that he might not buy the excuse. It'll make things more complicated than they should be. Well, let's just wait and see, Jaria shrugged. Besides, there's a war brewing, so the queen could be right. They probably wouldn't make a big deal out of it as long as you show yourself. Letting out a sigh, Xenia stopped in her tracks as they finally reached the door to the meeting hall. It was flanked by guards on both sides, all of them coming from the Valkyries. Announcing the presence of Princess Xenia, the eldest daughter of King Stefan and the soon-to-be wife of the vampire king, Jaira declared, her head held up high as she spoke. Xenia silently cursed, wondering why she even used Zen as her alias. She was pretty sure that Darius would inevitably put the pieces together once her face was revealed. If she wanted to keep this charade up, she needed to keep her face hidden from him no matter what. The door opened, and Xenia took in a deep breath before she stepped into the hall. Chapter 45 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Inside the meeting hall, the commotion about the pending wedding was still the pressing topic of discussion. I already told you, my daughter didn't run away, King Stefan reasoned. She's missing, and the palace mages are still discreetly looking for her. Ha! Only fools will believe that, one of the Valkyries elders snorted. I can't believe that we're still wasting our time on this discussion when there's an oncoming threat to our kingdom, the king of Ebodia roared. For goodness sake. My son already left with the bulk of our military power, and here you are taking advantage of our weakened defenses. You should be assisting our kingdom by now, seeing as we're more than ready to proceed with this alliance. My second daughter is more willing to offer herself as a substitute for her sister should we fail to find my eldest in due time. Why should we even assist Ebodia in this war when the alliance is still not finalized? Another Valkyries elder questioned. Said alliance should only be binding once the marriage has taken place. Darius kept silent as he waited on how Nikolai would resolve this issue. He knew that his fellow king could easily accept the second princess, but the Valkyries council and the royals who were with him were far too adamant against the notion. He then looked at King Stefan, who also darted his eyes in his direction. The human king gave him an apologetic look every once in a while. It seemed like the distressed king wouldn't be able to have the private talk he wanted with him at the rate this discussion was going. Letting out the lightest scoff, Darius thought of checking up on Zen instead. He would rather watch and be with Zen than waste his time listening to this kind of discussion. These Valkyries elders and royals obviously wanted nothing but to simply take over Ebodia, and they were leading the discussion around in circles in hopes that they could get what they want. They were merely using the incident with the elder princess as an excuse for their behavior. Having had enough, Darius stood from his chair to leave, only to stop when a Valkyries soldier entered and declared, "The eldest princess, Princess Xenia, is currently outside and asking to enter the hall." King Stefan quickly barked out with a frown. "What are you waiting for? Let my daughter in this instant." The soldier quickly looked at his king, Nikolai nodding to the soldier before he finally opened the door for the princess. I guess it'll be rude to leave at this point, Darius thought as he got back on his seat, only to frown as his eyes darted towards the woman entering the hall. His eyes widened. That intoxicating scent like no other. That smell that kept on haunting and torturing him. Zen, he gasped as he suddenly inhaled the familiar scent entering the hall. She's that woman. Our Zen. Zeus hollered out. Short for Xenia. Ha. She's the runaway princess. And this is the arranged marriage that she once mentioned about. No wonder Zen is always in a hurry to reach Ebodia. Our mate is the princess. Wait, she's that bat's bride. Be. No. Darius ignored Zeus's growling in his head as his gaze refused to leave the woman currently wearing a white gown. She also had a veil covering all of her face. All, except for her eyes. Those verdant green forests. Clenching his jaw, Darius kept his outward appearance in check as he instantly contacted Gideon and Bardas telepathically. After a few moments, however, there was no response. He knew he should really be running now to see what happened, but his body remained still where he was sitting. His mate was here, so he had to stay. Yes, he was already aware that Zen was a woman since that day he woke up in the cage and looked for her. He accidentally saw Zen cleaning herself up by the pool of the waterfalls, and he had known it ever since. It was no deer that Zen heard that day while she was in the water. It was him. It was unforgettable. That sight alone became his greatest torment while he was with Zen. Everything was so vivid in his head, and Zen's alluring and perfect body as a woman haunted his dreams. Her long brown hair glistened from the sun's rays, blending well with the color of her verdant eyes as she bathed in the light. And that wasn't all. He even had the opportunity to be intimate with her when she ate the tatar berries. She almost killed him that night, torturing him enough that he even had to shut Zeus off to keep himself sane and in control instead of just ravishing her wholesale. He kept reminding himself that he shouldn't take advantage of her because she didn't know what she was doing. She was well under the poison's aphrodisiac influence at the time, so he did his best to not cross the line. Zen was his mate, and he didn't want to force himself on her just because he had every opportunity to do so. Hell, He was someone who didn't even believe in mates and the mate pull for a reason. He wanted to make Zen his not because he simply wanted to, but he also wanted her to desire him all the same. He wanted to make her fully surrender herself to him of her own free will. Enough with those gentlemanly thoughts. You're about to lose Zen, and I know you want Zen as a man. Zeus chided him. You already fell for her without even realizing it. Do something, you idiot. Don't let her marry that bat friend of yours. Shaking his head, Darius looked at Nikolai, who also had the same unbothered expression etched onto his face. Zeus was right. He had to do something. Making up his mind, his eyes darted towards the woman who just entered the room. Their eyes met, and Darius gritted his teeth as he kept himself in check and refused to bat an eye at her. As he expected, Zen quickly turned her eyes away from him, seemingly pretending as if he didn't exist. I apologize for the mess I caused. I heard what happened from our mage who found and saved me inside my sister's private garden, Xenia began. I went there at dawn to calm myself from worries plaguing my mind, not wanting my family to find out about it as I ruminated about my upcoming marriage. While I was there, I then saw some berries in her garden, so decided to eat them out of hunger. Unfortunately, because of my ignorance, I lost then consciousness. What a lovely voice you have, my princess, Darius mused, his eyes fixated on his mate. Do you really think you can fool me that easily? You won't get away from me no matter what. Chapter 46. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xenia couldn't help holding her breath whenever she would meet Darius's piercing gaze. Still, she knew she had to keep her poise up, so she met his gaze with the same intensity as last time. It was bold. It was dangerous. In the end, that pointed gaze he constantly gave her was just too much for her. Conceding defeat, she found herself cowering as she took her eyes away from the werewolf king's direction. Explain. King Stefan roared, his eye boring drills to their kingdom's mage, Jaira. The princess did her best not to flinch. As expected of the Abodian royal family, all of them were quite good at picking up on the situation. First her mother, and now her father, they quickly adapted on the fly, picking up on whatever they had to work with and running away with it. It was quite admirable. They were quite good at acting, weren't they? Hearing her king's outburst, Jaira quickly cleared her throat. Your Majesty, the princess unknowingly ate a berry that, in the eyes of a mere human, looks nothing more than a luscious and edible fruit. A bigger disaster has been averted, but if she were left unattended for a day, she could have lost her life, she explained. It was only fortunate that while I was looking for the princess, I didn't skip over the garden and I somehow found the princess unconscious. We can only thank the heavens that I found her early enough to clear the poison from her system before it did any lasting damage. Jaira's explanation lingered over the room as everyone's eyes landed on the two of them. A few beats later, a few silent murmurs echoed from Valkyrie's side of the hall. Xenia blinked. She was back in time before the intended schedule for the wedding, so there shouldn't be any problems, right? The Vampire King and his companions shouldn't have to make a big deal out of it. Waiting for the tension inside the room to drop, Xenia couldn't help but sneak a glance at Darius's direction. And as expected, there he was again, his eyes still on her as if he knew exactly who she was. She unknowingly held her breath as she silently prayed for the werewolf king to not cause a scene. To her horror, however, Darius suddenly stepped forward and spoke. King Stefan and King Nikolai, would you be so kind as to let me interrupt this discussion for a while? The foreign king spoke, reminding everyone that he was still present in the room. Worry not, I wouldn't take too much of your time since I'm also in a hurry to leave. Darius's voice made Xenia's body freeze in fear. Oh no, she inwardly cringed as her face paled. It was only a good thing that she was currently covered by her veil. Her throat dried up as she quickly thought up of what to say in the worst-case scenario. She could only hope that Darius wouldn't throw out a curveball for her to navigate. Of course, King Darius. Please speak freely. Xenia's father replied, and King Nikolai simply nodded as an answer. Acknowledging the permission given to him, Darius looked at her father with a slight frown as he addressed, I believe that you have an important matter to discuss with me today. I don't want to be rude, but I have no intention of staying here in this kingdom just to simply witness this pressing matter between the Valkyries and Ebodia, which I have no concern with whatsoever. He scoffed, furthermore, I also won't allow you to cancel our meeting and waste the days of travel I had already gone through to meet and talk to you, as per your request. Please tell me your concerns at this moment so we can move on. I don't mind the others inside this hall hearing of it. King Stefan gulped. Clearing his throat, he cautiously spoke. I do apologize that you have to witness this mess, but indeed. I asked for your presence for a very important discussion aside from inviting you to my daughter's marriage ceremony, he nodded as he then turned to King Nikolai. Although, I do believe that your side wouldn't let me out of this hall under any circumstance. As such, as King Darius suggested, I will discuss matters with him here before all of you. The tension in the room became all the heavier as everyone present listened in on the separate discussion happening in front of them. Xenia could only stand at attention, her heart hammering as she kept an ear open. King Darius, I would also like to discuss a potential alliance between my kingdom and yours, King Stefan began. My son and I came up with a proposal that might be to both of our kingdoms' advantage. As quickly as he waved, King Stefan signaled for his great Chancellor Corpus, who at that instant approached King Darius and handed him the documents of the proposal. King Darius looked at it with a blank face, and Xenia bit her lower lip as she waited for the werewolf king's reaction. In all honesty, she thought that she was already spared from much of the chaos, seeing as Darius had suddenly brought up another topic that led the discussion away from her. However, Xenia was still wary about the current situation. After all, what if she had to face something chaotic happening very soon? Then again, that was probably just her guilt making her think too much for deceiving the werewolf king. How come you're not offering a marriage proposal here, King Stefan? Darius nonchalantly asked, his eyes darting to Xenia as he scoffed. How come the Valkyries king has that offer extended to him and not me? What's with that look? Xenia nervously thought. Did he somehow recognize me from my eyes alone? But, that should be impossible, it was nerve-wracking. She was so dead nervous at the prospect of being found out. But, she shouldn't be, right? There was simply no way that Darius would recognize her with her face covered like that. Hearing his fellow king, a dim expression descended on Xenia's father as he replied, You must be mistaken, King Darius. I never offered my daughter to King Nikolai. It was their side that insisted that I marry my daughter to him in order to secure the alliance. Xenia clenched her jaw, knowing how his father must be in so much turmoil at this point. Her father never wanted to make any of his family act as sacrificial lambs unless they had no choice. At the end of the day, their people's peace and safety should come first and foremost before their own happiness. She could only thank the heavens that her mother was not present at that moment to witness this. Letting her eyes wander back to Darius, she met his scrutinizing stare with a glare of her own as she kept her silence. If Darius took offense to her act, he didn't bat an eye at her as he said, If that's the case, then I would also like to marry your daughter to secure this alliance. BDNV he asserted himself, What would you do now, I wonder? I want her, King Stefan. Chapter 47 You are listening at novelfull.audio. King Stefan gasped as he followed his fellow king's eyes. My eldest daughter. His eyes widened, looking as if making sure that the werewolf king was pointing at the right woman. Yes. I want Princess Xenia to be my wife to secure this potential alliance you want between our kingdoms, King Darius reiterated himself. He then looked at Xenia intently and firmly announced, I won't ask for any other thing except for your daughter. In return, I am willing to comply with all of your demands so long as it is reasonable enough and won't be against the principles, rules, and laws of my kingdom. There was a pause. Everyone was stunned at the werewolf king's words. Time is ticking. War is coming to your kingdom, and I am willing to fight alongside you once you give me a positive answer, Darius pressed on. The hand of your eldest daughter, Princess Xenia, in exchange for my assistance. He kept himself at the ready as he waited for a response. He purposefully interrupted the discussion before the Valkyries side could accept the princess's alibi of accidental poisoning and decided to proceed with the wedding. If he didn't do such a thing, then it would be too late. There was a war coming, but there was still time to spare for the wedding to continue. It was the final step to secure the alliance that Ebodia needed to survive. Judging by the situation, Nikolai had brought enough soldiers with him that they could already aid in securing the castle at the very least. Then, reinforcement from Valkyries would follow as soon as this marriage happened. With one word, he could lose his mate to his friend Nikolai at any moment, something that he simply couldn't allow to happen. Just the thought of seeing Zen with another man was already making him feral, and the beast in him was already on the verge of coming out at any given moment. Darius looked at Nikolai with a heavy sigh. He and his fellow had a deep bond to the point where he almost died to save him once. Of course, he didn't save Nikolai's life years ago just to receive something in return. But at this rate, it was the only choice he got to secure his mate should things not go as smoothly as he hoped. As expected, a commotion filled the hall. There were unpleasant reactions to Darius's words, and the Ebodia king was caught off guard as he didn't see such an offer coming at all. Heavens, the king of Ebodia burst out. Xenia looked at her father in worry. He had a conflicted expression on his face, and she had no idea what to say or even do. She was speechless. She felt like fainting just to avoid the situation right now. If she hadn't run away, they wouldn't have been in this mess in the first place. This is all my fault. Her eyes darted back at Darius. He was still as composed as ever, looking like someone who wouldn't budge at his own words. It was par for the course, but what baffled Xenia was the devious smile currently on the king's face. It was as if what he just said earlier was something that should be so simple to accept. Why would Darius act like that over her? Why meddle in an affair like this and create another mess for a princess he had never even met or knew? It's so unlike him to, unless, the princess's eyes widened as a damning realization dawned on her. Darius probably knew that she was Zen. But since when? This is absurd, Your Highness. The werewolf king is disrespecting us right before our faces, one of the elders from the Valkyries exclaimed. This is an insult to our kingdom. Let us ignore such drivel. The princess is back, and we can now proceed with this marriage alliance as initially planned. Xenia looked at King Nikolai, who also had a stoic expression on his face before shifting her gaze back to Darius. She could only wonder what was going on inside these two kings' heads, who just seemed to stare at each other for quite some time without so much as moving an inch. Why? It was the only word that King Nikolai uttered, his eyes keenly staring at Darius as he waited for an answer. Zen is mine, Darius firmly declared, his strong and unbreakable voice booming as if he was proud of announcing it to everyone inside the hall. She is my mate. There was no other explanation needed once the word mate slipped through Darius's lips. Everyone in the room knew about how a werewolf had their destined mates that only a werewolf could recognize. There was no point in arguing anymore. That possessive beast. A mate. He seriously just said that. Xenia thought as she glared daggers at Darius's direction as if feeling her sight bore into him. Darius turned to her and gave her a sly smirk. Those eyes of his sent her a silent message, one of endless torture at the fact that he now owned her. You do know the grave consequences of what you are imposing, Darius. King Nikolai calmly addressed. What you are suggesting right now is an indication that you want to be enemies with my kingdom by stealing my bride. Be. I wish nothing of the sort, Nikolai. And you know that I want nothing but to be a good friend to you, ensuring a lasting peace between our kingdoms. Darius promptly assuaged. I am willing to compromise with your terms as long as you hand me my mate, who is Princess Xenia. If you won't allow it, then I will have no choice but to use the beholden law. Xenia could only watch from the sidelines as her name was thrown about like it was nothing. She felt like nothing more than a bargaining chip between these two powerful beasts, and she didn't like it at all. She wasn't a thing that they could bargain with like they were playing a game, and she wasn't some kind of prize and trophy either. And yet, that was the harsh reality that Xenia had to accept for the betterment of their people. "All right, the beholden law it is," King Nikolai plainly responded with a sigh. "If not for you saving my life back then, I won't be standing here right now. I will concede and let you have Princess Xenia. In return, I am beholden no more to the werewolf king of Corden." A Valkrez elder was too quick to complain. "But your highness, this is..." "My decision is final," the vampire king announced, using a gesture of his hand to stop one of his elders from speaking up. "No one should question it. I will accept the second princess, Princess Mini, in this marriage alliance with the kingdom of Ebodia. We will proceed as planned. My marriage with Princess Mini will happen today, but she's the cursed princess," Nikolai, a woman on the Valkrez side exclaimed. Xenia could only assume that the woman was a member of the royal family with how she dressed and how she addressed the vampire king. Chapter 48. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Xenia looked at her sister Mini, and she couldn't help but feel a stabbing pain go through her chest. Her little sister had to suffer this discrimination alone, and she couldn't do anything to stop it. Xenia balled her fists, her knuckles turning white as she mustered up the courage to voice out her thoughts. She opened her mouth to speak for her sister, but the vampire king's voice came first. "Aren't we also cursed? I'm sure most humans consider our kind cursed as well," King Nikolai plainly spoke, a subtle smile forming on his face as his eyes darted towards her sister. "Isn't this a match made in heaven? To unite two people that are both cursed. A sucking blood monster marrying a cursed princess. I'm pretty sure that Princess Mini and I will get along well, my dear sister, so please worry no more. We don't have time to waste then. We will proceed with the initial wedding for King Nikolai and my daughter, Princess Mini, and finalize this alliance once and for all." Xenia's father interrupted. He then looked at Darius and continued, "It is in our tradition to not wed in haste and have two marriages at the same time. As such, we will have to wait for another 30 days to avoid a bad omen in the family." He nodded. "We will have to make another set of preparations for your wedding to my daughter during that time, King Darius. But while it might not happen today, we shall announce to all the realms that my daughter, Princess Xenia, is already bound to marry the werewolf king at the kingdom of Corden." Hearing her father talk, Xenia let out a sigh. It all happened so quickly that she didn't even have time to process it all. Now, she was bound to marry Darius, the werewolf king, and she had nothing to say in the matter. "Mother isn't back yet," Xenia murmured. Jaira, who was still beside her, whispered, "I believe she's still fixing and arranging some things to back up our alibi just in case. But with the way things ended, it's no longer necessary. Let me go and get her." Xenia only nodded in appreciation as she let out another sigh. Currently, everything was settled. And thus, the wedding would begin shortly as scheduled. Xenia sat beside her sister while Darius and Nikolai both became busy discussing matters with their father. "You're back," Mini greeted her with a faint smile. "I'm glad you're safe." Xenia could only let out a pained smile as she grabbed her sister's hand. Gently squeezing it between her fingers, she said, "I am so sorry, Mini, to have caused you all of this trouble. I don't know where to even start." "Please don't worry about it," Mini uttered out, her soft tone doing little to assuage her. "I will go through all of this with my own accord, sister." Hearing her words, Xenia let out another sigh as she looked at the vampire king. "I was about to defend you earlier. We're not even sure if you're really the one cursed." And yet, the eldest sister trailed off before continuing. "The vampire king was considerate enough to step into your defense, sister. I heard he doesn't drink human blood, especially those who he deems innocent. And Darius only said good things about him, so hopefully, he will treat you well. You can always come back to us should you encounter any problems once. I'm already old enough, sister, Mini smiled at her, squeezing Xenia's hand as if to stop her. Remember, you're just a year older than me. You should stop worrying too much. I can protect myself just fine. Xenia nodded at her sister's words. Yes. While Mini might not have any skill in terms of combat, her knowledge of magic, potions, and poisons was more than deadly enough to give her some way to defend herself. Looking at her sister intently, Xenia gently cupped her cheeks as she smiled, "Look at you. I guess you're definitely a woman now." She wasn't lying by a long shot. Her sister was a beauty and was the real epitome of a royal princess. She loved Mini's eyes, even though everyone believed that she was the one among the queen's children who inherited the curse because of their mismatched hue. There were two different colors on Mini's eyes, one was blue, while the other was hazel. It was a reasonable guess. Their mother, the queen, was an angel who fell in love with a human. She was apparently cast out from heaven bearing a curse as punishment, that she would pass on the said curse to her lineage for all of her life. Still, the theory about the curse was unclear even to this day. For all intents and purposes, it could also be her or even Ezekiel that bore the curse. But since Mini had a rare physical trait, everybody just assumed that it was her who received the curse. "My dear sister, I noticed that you're addressing the werewolf king by his name," Mini pointed out as she teased. "I'm assuming this isn't your first encounter with him." "Yeah. He saved me, thus he thinks he owns my life ever since," Xenia chuckled. "Well, you must know that I am someone you all shouldn't be worried about. I can handle that king well enough," she boasted, just so Mini wouldn't worry about her. "That's good and satisfying enough for me then," Mini chuckled. "At least we can contribute to our people's needs in matters like this." Xenia nodded in agreement. It was simply their duty as princesses to be used as bargaining chips. Such was their life, and it was for the best. Soon, their mother arrived inside the meeting hall with Jaira. The sisters both gave their mother a reassuring smile, seeing how their mother's eyes were welling up with tears at the sight of them. Meanwhile, almost everyone left the meeting hall to prepare for the wedding. It would be held just a bit earlier than the original schedule, which was planned to happen at nighttime. Xenia almost wanted to hug her mother with her sister. But before they could greet one another, she found herself holding her breath as Darius walked towards them. Approaching her father, he simply nodded as he spoke. "I will take my leave to aid your son Ezekiel now, King Stephen," Darius boldly declared. "However, I would much like the princess, my bride be, to accompany me to the encampment of the Abodia army." "What? No." It was the queen who answered. "My queen, please calm down," King Stephen told his wife. He walked towards Darius and politely replied, "King Darius, will you be so kind as to step out for now? My servant will escort you to your chambers. Kindly give me a moment of privacy with my family and discuss the matters at hand. I will visit you shortly with my answer." Darius simply nodded. But before he left, he reiterated his stand and said, "You must know, King Stephen, that I do not wish for any counter-offer you might have. I will only accept having your daughter alone by my side, and that is all." "I understand," King Stephen gravely replied. Darius headed out, leaving the family to their lonesome as he made his way to Gideon and Bardas. Chapter 49. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As soon as Darius was out, King Stephen dismissed the rest of their men in the premises, leaving only him and his family inside the room. "Oh. I'm sorry. This is all my fault. This is my punishment for not following heaven's will," the queen cried, Xenia and Mini quickly comforting their mother with a soothing hug. "It's because of me that Mini's become a cursed princess. And now, both of my daughters will have to marry. Oh, heavens. Mother, please get a hold of yourself. It's not your fault. And besides, everything went well in the end," Xenia reassuringly stated. This is bound to happen sooner or later to protect our people. The Vampire King accepted Mini despite everything. And I. Darius. I mean the Werewolf King saved my life when I'm on the brink of death. I owe him my life, so you really don't have anything to worry about. You and the Werewolf King, her father gasped. Xenia nodded. She then briefed her family about her recent encounters with the king, seeing their questioning and interested eyes as she regaled them of her misadventures. By the time she was finished, her family was looking at her with a mix of guilt, pity, and a hint of pride. No wonder you two were together when you arrived here in the castle, Xenia's father thought aloud. He's a werewolf though, Xenia, and he said that you're his mate. If so, it was only natural for him to recognize you from your scent alone. I know, Xenia sighed. So, what's your plan now, daughter? Her father asked. He's requiring you to accompany him to. No, her mother yelped aloud, cutting her father off. Our daughter just came back to us, and yet you're considering agreeing to send her out to the battlegrounds. Seeing her mother distraught, Xenia held the older woman's hand as she said, Mother, you should know that even if Darius didn't drag me there, I will still sneak out just so that I can help Ezekiel. It's what my heart desires. But, Mini can stay beside you, seeing as you guys can create potions and cast powerful spells, Xenia continued. You two can chant out shields and weapons for our cause. But me. I'm not born for magic. Physical combat is all I'm good for, she lamented. So please, still your heart and worry no more. Like father said, I am the Werewolf King's mate, and I'm sure you know how a werewolf would protect his mate with all his might, right? A moment of silence seemed to stretch on before her father finally spoke. There's not much time, my dear wife, he stressed out. You have to prepare Mini for the wedding as well. Hearing the king's words, their mother finally gathered some of her composure as she stood resolute. Looking intently at her and Mini, she said, no matter what happened in the past, I have no regrets. Even if given a second chance in life, I will still choose to do the same. She let out a loving sigh. Falling in love with your father and having you two and Ezekiel as my children are the best things that ever happened in my life. She looked at Mini and said, I'll be fine. I'm simply hurting, and I'm truly sorry that I have to pass on my punishment for breaking the ordeal to you and. Shoo, Mini soothed her mother, rubbing her back as she hugged her. Please, mother, stop it. We're not even sure if I'm really cursed. Remember, Beirut's foresight is far from clear. There was another loud sigh as their father took all of the room's attention back to himself. Come now. Let's prepare our daughters, Mini for her wedding, and Xenia for her journey with the Werewolf King. He then turned to Xenia and continued, I will have Jaira stay by your side, Mini. Together with a few trusted knights of our own, they'll act as your protection from any sort of harm. Xenia only nodded at her father's words. There was work to be done, and there was only so much time before they had to move. You two go ahead and prepare, the king nodded to her and Mini. I will have to talk to your mother for some time. Heeding their father's words, the two princesses immediately walked out of the meeting hall. Making their way to their own chambers, they shared a smile together as they walked. Although. Come with me for a while, Mini pulled at Xenia's arm. I have something to give to you. Sure. Giving her assent, Xenia let herself get dragged as her little sister almost pulled her out of the hall and towards her own chamber. Mini then quickly dismissed her servants and chamberlains who were supposed to assist her in changing into her wedding dress. I won't take long with my sister, Mini explained, making everyone go outside her room and wait. She then turned to her sister, wait here. What is it? Xenia asked, watching as Mini grabbed something from her closet. I succeeded in the potion I was experimenting on, Mini explained as she handed her a small box. Opening it up, Xenia saw 2 pills nestled inside it. These pills are life and death, Xenia. The green one is life, and the black one is death. Keep it with you just in case there will be a time when you'll need it. She then suddenly stood up and got a bottle from one of her many shelves. Uttering a chant on it, Minnie then quickly gave it to her elder sister. Here. I also gave one to brother Ezekiel. Put a drop of this to your weapons, and even though I'm not with you too, my spells will at least make you kill an enemy in simply one strike. Stashing the 2 gifts she just got from her sister, Xenia nodded before pulling Minnie in for a hug. That's so thoughtful of you, Minnie. And yet here I am, empty-handed on your wedding day. Minnie chuckled. You can make up to me by visiting me often at Valcres, sister. Or maybe even spend a vacation there after the war. Xenia nodded. Right, Minnie would have to travel back to Valcres with the Vampire King as soon as the wedding was finished. Yes, my dear sister. I'll do exactly that, Xenia nodded, doing her best to comfort her little sister. Don't worry too much. You'll definitely be fine. The two shared a brief moment together, just being 2 loving sisters as they hugged each other for comfort. Eventually, one of them had to let go, time working against them as they began their preparations. Now, let me help you prepare for the wedding, Xenia snorted. I have to at least witness it before I leave for war. Calling in the maids, Xenia began to prepare her sister for her wedding day. With each dress and ribbon that they put on her, she couldn't help but admire her sister's beauty, watching lovingly as Minnie slowly got dressed. The Vampire King is too lucky, Xenia commented. I can only hope that I can capture his heart then, Minnie answered with a timid smile. Xenia raised an eyebrow. She didn't expect that kind answer from her sister. For some reason, she suddenly thought of Darius, who was now about to become her husband in 30 days. Could she even? She deliberately shook her head. Somehow, she couldn't imagine herself saying the exact same words as Minnie. Would she also want the same, then? Did she want to capture Darius's heart? Chapter 50. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Darius was walking through the hallway to go back to the chamber where he left Gideon and Bardas when he passed by Nikolai and his sister, Esme. He didn't announce his presence, but it was clear that the duo noticed his arrival. What a fool, using the beholden law for a mere human, Darius heard Esme snort, only for her to quickly compose herself as she saw him. King Darius, I. Raising his hand in both greetings and as a signal for her sister to shut up, Nikolai chuckled, apologies for my rude sister, Darius. Give her some time. She'll get over you. Esme's face fell at her brother's words. Without even so much as a sound, she stomped her way back inside her delegated chambers, leaving the 2 kings alone in the hallway. Watching her leave, Darius only shook his head with a half smile. He knew Esme well enough to ignore such words from her. Leaning on the wall, Nikolai crossed his arms and commented, You made such a great scene today, my friend. Darius let out a sigh, I apologize for what happened. I'll be sure to make it up to you in other ways, Nikolai. It's just what it is. The moment the princess entered this hall, I already recognized her scent and I can't be mistaken. Nikolai let out a commiserating sigh at his friend's words, I trust you, and I know you well enough, Darius. But I never thought that of all werewolves, you will be the one that would end up surrendering to the mate pull. He shrugged, I guess even the mighty Darius is also helpless against this so-called mate pull thing. Darius growled at what he heard, signaling to Nikolai that he better stop talking. It was humiliating. He knew that he'd be the butt of everyone's jokes if the news ever got out in a bad light. Those who knew him well enough would just be ecstatic to hear that the mighty werewolf king, one who famously didn't believe in traditions such as mates and the mate pull, ended up surrendering to those very things. Taking his cue, Nikolai shook his head with a teasing laugh as he patted Darius on the shoulder. With an amused scoff, he replied, Well, I suppose we've taken up too much of each other's time. See you on the battlefield, my friend. Although, you don't need to watch my back this time. The Vampire King nodded to his friend, Just let me die in peace. I don't want you invoking the beholden law right at my face for a woman again. Returning his friend's nod, Darius simply let out a sigh as he watched Nikolai walk back to his chambers. He knew it wasn't new, but still, he didn't understand why that bat had his inner struggles about living. "Sire. Zen escaped," Gideon telepathically reported, taking Darius out of his musings. "He knocked us out, but something feels off." Hearing the obvious, the werewolf king frowned as he ignored Gideon's outdated report. Heading back to the chamber where he left the two, he nonchalantly opened the door, only to be greeted by his two lackeys as they quickly ran their mouths. "Your Majesty." Gideon and Bardas burst out in chorus, both of them massaging their heads as if they had just regained consciousness. "Since when did you two learn to put your guard down?" Darius chided. "Your Majesty, Zen knocked us out, but something feels wrong," Gideon reasoned, repeating the words he just said to him just seconds ago. "I don't know why, but—" "Stop repeating yourself," Darius cut him off with a breath. "Zen is here. She's the runaway princess of Ebodia. Zen is a woman." Gideon, his eyes and mouth agape at the news. Darius simply nodded before continuing with a sigh. "Yes. I can only assume that the queen asked a mage to secure her, and apparently distort your memories while they were at it," the king noted. "Also, judging by how you two don't even have the slightest bruise, not to mention how clean this chamber still is, it's only obvious that not a single fight took place here." The brief silence that followed was both nerve-wracking and embarrassing, to say the least. Darius didn't know when his men became this dull, but he was sure to rectify such a mistake as soon as he was able. "Thank heavens and the Almighty for this, Your Majesty!" Gideon happily exclaimed. "Your mate is a woman. This is definitely good news." "Mate?" Bardas questioningly burst out, his mind still trying to process the news about Zen being both a woman and a princess. "Yeah. No wonder His Majesty was possessive of Zen," Gideon nodded his head in understanding. "No one knows His Majesty better than I do, and I noticed his weird behavior ever since we embarked." He then curiously remarked, "Although, isn't she bound to marry the Vampire King?" Darius resisted the overwhelming urge to sigh as he addressed them, "We will talk more about this later. For now, I want you to pass on a message." He let out a short breath as he relayed his instructions. "I want my Moonlight Cavalry to aid Ebodia as reinforcements in this coming battle against the approaching armies of Helion. I had just signed and finalized an alliance agreement with King Stefan, and I intend to uphold my end of the bargain." Gideon quickly nodded, but he slightly frowned as he then asked, "An alliance? A marriage alliance?" "Yes," Darius nodded. "I will marry Zen 30 days from now. I used the beholden law on Nikolai to get her hand in marriage." By the end of the discussion, he ended up agreeing to marry the second princess today to continue the agreed-upon alliance. "TSK, that's a shocking turn of events," Gideon clicked his tongue at the news. "However, the elders probably wouldn't accept Zen as our queen even if she's your mate, Your Majesty. She's a mere human, so she will most likely be nothing more than a lady consort." He continued, "For our kingdom to strive, they'll insist on you need a Luna." "Enough, Gideon. I know what I'm doing," Darius cut him off with annoyance seeping into his tone. "You two should go on ahead and finish the task I ordered. After the wedding, we will then march towards the Ebodia encampment with Zen to aid Prince Ezekiel." "Yes, sire." With a snappy salute, the two quickly answered before hastily leaving the room. There was no time to waste, after all, and the war was nothing if not bloody and time-consuming. "Since when did you know?" Bardas telepathically asked Gideon. "Since he brought Zen to the chamber next to his back in the castle," Gideon mentally replied. "I already smelled something fishy back then, and then I find His Majesty constantly sneaking glances at Zen for some reason. Add to that his insistence that they both ride on one horse. That's too unlike him. How come you never? Ah. I refrain from gossiping about it to you and the others." Gideon quickly shut him up to his reasoning. "Do you want His Highness to kill me?" Zen was a male in at the time. I can only sympathize with his torment then, but at least now we know that Zen is a woman. Isn't the Almighty still good to him? Giving him a female mate. He mentally showed his excitement. Wow. Now I'm wondering what Zen would look like wearing her actual clothes as a woman. Bardist telepathically relayed his lack of interest. It doesn't matter. The problem right now is what exactly His Majesty is planning on doing. The elders are right. They predicted a marriage alliance being finalized in this meeting, and while they aren't against it, they will surely not allow a human princess to be the queen. That's why I reminded His Majesty about it. Gideon agreed with his companion. I'm also curious about what he's thinking. It's not like him to take 2 wives just so as to have the other one as his legitimate queen, right? Though. I do believe we have a law on this, he vaguely recalled. If memory serves right, Zen will just need to prove herself worthy to be a queen. She will need to fight the others for it. And it will be bloody for a mere human.